Okay, here we are at Gary Bear's Crankup, and here's Gary. He's the guy who got this engine running. This is a 5 horsepower Falk made in the early 1900s, and he's going to tell us a little bit about it. The Falk has a carburation system that was needed to make an oil pull run, and that's why Rumley bought this company. And Gary's going to tell us what's in this carburetor.
The Seeger-Higgins carburation, which is this carburetor right here with my hands on. The first needle valve is for starting it on gasoline. This one here is for running it on kerosene. And this one here is for injecting water to keep the kerosene from knocking. And between this casting and this casting, there's a brass plate in here, a heat riser that the fuel dripped on. And the exhaust, the intake heated this up. When we heat that plate up, and it would vaporize the fuel when it come in it. That's how they could run kerosene in this throttle governor engine.
Yeah. So this engine is really critical to the farm tractor manufacturing business.
And Falk was bought out by Rumley in around 1915 because they wanted the carburation design, and Seeger-Higgins carburation was used in all full tractors after that. And sometime in 1915, Rumley abandoned building these engines.
Yeah. Anyway, Gary got this engine out of a barn in southern Illinois when 2014.
I think so.
Got this engine about 6 years ago out of a barn. It had been stored inside for years, and he stopped at a car wash on the way home, cleaned the grime off of it, got it back here to his farm, put the flywheels on it, oiled it up, put some fuel in it, hooked the battery to it, and it fired right up for him. And then he had to restore it. He's done a bunch of work. All the pins and linkages in here were sloppy, and of course it needed the fuel pump, water pump cleaned out, that type of thing. This engine's unusual in that it has its original water tank yet, and the only parts that really aren't original is the cart. The wheels and the original cart were gone, and he's put on wheels that are appropriate to the period it came from. So anyway, Gary's done a fine job on this. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay, here we are out at outside at Gary's place on his semi-annual Crankup, and he is going to fire up the 9-horse Sears Economy.
Slow down, Dave. Pause.
That's okay. Oh, crumb.
Pause. I got to fix the wire.
Anyway, this engine was located in eastern Kentucky, just upstream on Bucks Branch from Martin. And it was collected back in the late 70s. And Gary got this one, golly, trying to think when you got this one. You got it about 2015, I think. And he's done a fine job restoring it. He's built a cart for it. It's a better cart than Sears and Hercules originally made. This is made out of heavier metal. He's got some wheels from a case threshing machine. So when this thing's sitting here running, it just is really steady. It's got a lot of good iron under it. And when Gary got this, it had a Wyco magneto on it that had been adapted to it back when it was being used to grind corn. And Gary has changed that back to the original type. It's got a Webster magneto on it now to go with the igniter. And we're going to see if he's going to see if he can make this baby run. There he is, priming it. And we're going to see if he'll fire up for him. Wow, first time. Wow, that is fantastic, Gary.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much. Okay, here we have an 8 horsepower Novo. Whoa, first flip. And Gary overhauled this one about 12 or 13, 6, 7, or 8 years ago. This one also came from Eastern Kentucky. This engine was used to run a water pump to pump water uphill to oil well drilling sites. And it came from out near Oil Springs, Kentucky. And anyway, this came from the factory on a frame with a big water pump. And that's why it doesn't have a belt pulley on it. It has a clutch on the left side of the engine there and a gear to run the water pump.
That should be running.
Anyway, he did a fine job on this. It had frozen at one time during its life, and Gary did some really fine surgery on that to fix it. A little cool yet this morning. When it warms up, it'll run a little smoother. Okay, here we see Gary Bare's, was it 6 horse?
6 horse throttle governed Titan. Made by International Harvester Company. Around 1916.
And this engine's unusual in that it has a sub base on it. This was meant to be sitting, on a floor in a factory. Most of these they sold didn't have the sub base, and they sat on a straight frame. And what Gary did here is that a Hercules or a Sears frame under it?
Yeah, it's either an electric wheel cart that Sears and Roebuck and Hercules used for their engines, and a lot of other companies use. Because I didn't want to take the sub base off the engine, I put it on there so to keep the height of the engine down where it was easy to handle on a trailer or whatever.
Yeah, if this was on a straight frame, it'd be really hard to handle. The center of gravity would be high, and it would be hard to crank. Anyway, this engine came to Gary in pieces. It came from up on Spurlock Creek in Floyd County, Kentucky, and it was used to run a stone burr mill to make cornmeal. And it was missing, let's move in close here.
It was missing 4 castings.
Scoot this down a bit where we can scoot this down. Get this straightened up here.
I'll go in and point to this
it was missing 4 different castings.
Listen, this casting here and all the pieces, punch rod, this casting here that runs on an eccentric, this casting right here, rocker arm,
and the housing that goes around your intake valve. It was gone, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, Gary was able to borrow engine parts from another collector, sent those to a foundry, and got replacement parts made, and then he had to have them machined.
Oh, it was missing this piece.
Yeah, I was missing that piece right there. Yeah. And anyway, this is really neat. Throttle governed. Of course, it was also missing the Webster magneto. The igniter body came with it, but not the magneto.
Missing the water tank.
And yeah, he had to come up with a water tank for it. But boy, it runs like a new one. It's really fine. Love listening to this one run.
When International Harvester quit building this engine, the next engine they built was the M Series International,
which is right over here. Yeah, this is what replaced that in the International lineup. There, and I think it just quit. I'm out of battery. Okay, here we see Gary's little 8 horsepower Bessemer. And this was truly a basket case when he got it. It was a mess. Oh man, listen to that baby go. Uh-oh. Oh, listen to that run. Oh, that is gorgeous. He's got to get her warmed up good for her to run. Oh, that is gorgeous. Running like a new one, Gary.
Well, almost.
This engine came from Lawrence County, Kentucky. It was used during its life to run a sorghum press. And at some point, the guy who owned it let it run out of oil in that oiler, and his rod busted. It started hammering, the rod busted, and it sat out in their barnyard until I saw it back in 1976. I saw this one and grabbed it and made a deal with Gary, and he's got her going. But it required a lot of work. He had to have it bored and sleeved and corded, had to build a new rod, and he's just done a lot of work. And the mixer valve over here ate his lunch. It was very hard to make that mixer valve work right. But anyway, this is a real triumph in engine restoration right here. Wow. Boy, that baby wants to run.
Well, I got my hand on the governor.
Yeah, that baby wants to run. Thank you very much, Gary. Man, oh man. What a machine. That's the guy who made it run right there. He told me we had this engine holding up our mailbox at the side of the road, and so he's called it the mailbox engine. That's how we met. Gary saw this engine sitting in front of our house, and that's how we got to know Gary. And he told me for years that he saw this engine running, and he did. He made her run. So